Long before the first dinosaur left its footprints in the mud, our planet had already lived through worlds more alien and astonishing than anything Hollywood has ever shown. Earth was once a boiling sphere of fire, then a frozen snowball, then a land of giant insects, sail-backed predators, and forests that could change the climate with every root. These forgotten chapters stretch across billions of years, packed with creatures and catastrophes that paved the way for the rise of dinosaurs, and ultimately, us. So buckle up, because we're about to journey into the lost ages of Earth, where survival meant constant reinvention, and every new world looked nothing like the last. The forgotten worlds before the dinosaurs. When most people think of Earth's past, dinosaurs are the first thing that come to mind. In movies, books, and museum rooms, they take over. But dinosaurs aren't the only part of Earth's past. The planet had been through whole worlds of animals, landscapes, and weather that are often forgotten for more than 3 billion years before they came to be. These worlds that are no longer there were just as exciting and important as the Mesozoic. The dinosaurs later lived on the stage that they built, and in many ways their stories are stranger than anything Hollywood has ever thought of. In Earth's earliest age, the land looked alien. The surface was mostly barren rock, broken by volcanoes, with no trees, flowers, or even grass. Oceans were filled with microbial mats, slimy carpets of bacteria that trapped sediments and built layered structures called stromatolites. These mats dominated coastlines for billions of years, long before anything resembling animals appeared. They are still found today in parts of Australia and the Bahamas, acting like living fossils. A casual observer might dismiss them as just slime, but studies in journals such as Nature Geoscience reveal how these mats pumped out oxygen and shaped the chemistry of entire oceans. Without them, there would have been no breathable air for any later creatures. The continents themselves also looked nothing like the map we know today. Early landmasses were small and scattered. They drifted, collided, and broke apart in cycles lasting hundreds of millions of years. Ancient supercontinents like Rodinia, Nuna, and later Pangaea each created unique worlds. Each arrangement of land controlled where oceans circulated, how climate behaved, and which ecosystems flourished. For example, during Rodinia's existence about 900 million years ago, much of the landmass sat near the equator, which may have helped trigger global ice ages when weathering of rocks pulled carbon dioxide out of the air. Before dinosaurs ever roamed, the planet already experienced 5 mass extinctions. Each was devastating enough to nearly reset the history of life. The Ordovician-Silurian extinction about 444 million years ago killed off roughly 85% of marine species. Later, the Permian-Triassic event around 252 million years ago wiped out over 90% of all life, including entire groups of dominant land animals. Dinosaurs rose only because they inherited a broken world after that disaster. When we study pre-dinosaur ages, we see that extinction was not rare. It was the rule, and survival often depended on luck as much as adaptation. Another forgotten world existed during the Carboniferous period, about 300 million years ago. This was a planet covered in endless swamp forests. Towering club mosses and giant horsetails formed dense jungles, and oxygen levels rose so high that insects grew to incredible sizes. Dragonflies with wingspans the length of a hawk and millipedes over 2 meters long thrived in this oxygen-rich world. If a modern person walked into a Carboniferous forest, they would recognize almost nothing. No flowers, no grasses, and no birdsong. Just the hiss and click of insect wings the size of dinner plates. Even earlier, during the Cambrian period, Earth witnessed the first great explosion of animal life. Seas swarmed with trilobites, bizarre predators like Anomalocaris and armored worms, soft-bodied creatures with eyes on stalks, spikes for defense, and filter-feeding appendages filled the oceans. According to research published in the Annual Review of Earth and Planetary Sciences, the Cambrian seas were as ecologically complex as any modern reef, even though no vertebrates yet existed. What's intriguing about these lost worlds is how different they were from each other. The ecosystem of today has been controlled by animals and flowering plants for tens of millions of years, but Earth before dinosaurs changed its shape many times. Whole areas and ways of life showed up, did well, and then vanished forever. We might have thought that some worlds, like the Silurian coasts where early land plants lived, were pretty empty. Some were dangerous and strange, like the Devonian seas full of armored fish. Scientists studying these deep histories often rely on hidden fossils that most people overlook. Spores preserved in rocks tell us when plants first stepped onto land. Microscopic shells of plankton track ancient ocean chemistry. Even the orientation of magnetic minerals in old lava flows reveals where continents once drifted. A paper in the Journal of Geophysical Research showed how these records allow us to rebuild maps of Earth as far back as 2 billion years. These reconstructions prove that the Earth before dinosaurs was not static. It was restless, violent, and always changing. The Hadean and Archean Earth oceans of fire and iron skies. Consider yourself on Earth more than 4 billion years ago. You can't feel the grass under your feet or hear the birds singing because there are no clouds or birds in the sky. Instead, you would be surrounded by lava plains, hot seas, and an air that is so poisonous that just one breath would kill you. This was the Hadean and Archean Earth. This was before there was life that we could see. Our world was still young and wild, but it was slowly setting the stage for everything that came after. Geologists call the earliest stage the Hadean Eon, lasting from Earth's formation about 4.5 billion years ago until 4 billion years ago. The name Hadean comes from Hades, the Greek underworld, because the planet resembled a kind of hell. Giant impacts were common. The Earth had only recently formed from dust and rock clumps orbiting the Sun, and leftover planet-sized objects still bombarded it. The most famous collision was with a Mars-sized body scientists call Theia. That impact blasted molten debris into space, which later coalesced into our moon. Research in Nature Geoscience suggests that this collision also helped mix Earth's mantle and may have delivered essential elements such as carbon and water. The surface during the Hadean was mostly magma oceans, huge seas of molten rock that glowed orange at night and steamed by day. Temperatures exceeded 1,000 degrees Celsius. Volcanoes constantly erupted, belching out gases like carbon dioxide, methane, and sulfur. Without oxygen in the air, the sky may have looked orange-red, heavy with haze. Lightning storms raged across these skies, and acid rain poured down. To modern humans, it sounds like a nightmare world. Yet this chaos created the first building blocks for life. By about 4 billion years ago, Earth cooled enough for solid crust to form. Oceans began to condense from water vapor in the atmosphere. At first, these oceans were likely superheated and full of dissolved minerals leached from volcanic rocks. They may have been greenish or even black, reflecting the high iron content. In fact, the Archean seas were rich in iron in a way unimaginable today. Without oxygen to rust it, dissolved iron simply floated in the water, waiting for chemical changes that would one day create banded iron formations, striped rocks that geologists still study. The Archean Eon, lasting from 4 to 2.5 billion years ago, saw the first stable continental crust. Tiny patches of land emerged, although most of the planet remained ocean-covered. These early continents were barren, without soil, trees, or grass. Wind blasted rock into dust, and rainfall carved rivers straight into bare stone. Studies published in the Journal of Geophysical Research show that plate tectonics may already have begun, although slower and less organized than today. This recycling of crust would later supply nutrients crucial for the rise of complex ecosystems. Microbial life, on the other hand, was the real beauty of the Archean. Stromatolites, which are piled mounds made of cyanobacteria, have been found in rocks from Western Australia and South Africa. They are more than 3.5 billion years old. These were the first builders on Earth. They stored rocks and gave off oxygen as waste. At first, oxygen didn't build up in the air. Instead, it mixed with all the iron that was already dissolved in the seas and made rusty layers that went to the bottom of the ocean. This is why some of the oldest iron ore reserves in the world are so big. During the Great Oxidation event, oxygen could finally start to build up in the air after the iron was used up. What makes this era remarkable is how alien yet productive it was. Hydrothermal vents, spewing hot mineral-rich water from the seafloor, may have been the cradles of life. In these vents, natural chemistry created complex organic molecules. Laboratory experiments inspired by studies in philosophical transactions of the Royal Society B show how these conditions could spark chains of reactions that form amino acids, the building blocks of proteins. It is possible that the first living cells formed not in calm ponds, as once thought, but in the dark, pressurized world of submarine vents. The Archean atmosphere was also unusual. With no oxygen, ultraviolet radiation from the sun bombarded the surface. Methane produced by microbes likely built up, creating a greenhouse effect that kept the planet warm even when the sun was weaker than today. Some scientists suggest the sky may have appeared hazy and orange due to these methane-rich conditions, similar to the skies of Saturn's moon Titan. An additional fact that was ignored is that Earth rotated much faster. There may have been days with only 18 hours. When the moon was closer than it is now, it caused the waves to be stronger. It's possible that these waves helped mix nutrients in the water near the coast, which indirectly helped microbes grow. The first breath, the Great Oxidation Event. If you went back 3 billion years in time and tried to breathe, it would be your last. The atmosphere of Earth at that time had almost no air. What it was made of was thick with nitrogen, carbon dioxide, and methane. There was life, but it was only microbial, which are very small single-celled creatures that did well without air. After that, something strange happened. Oxygen started to pour into the air around 2.4 billion years ago. This event is now known as the Great Oxidation Event. It was a major turning point in the history of the Earth. Everything that happened afterward, from big animals to the air we breathe today, was changed by it. At the heart of this story were cyanobacteria. These microorganisms, sometimes called blue-green algae, learned to capture sunlight through photosynthesis. While many microbes fed on chemicals from volcanic vents, cyanobacteria used water and sunlight to make energy, releasing oxygen as a waste product. At first, this oxygen didn't last long. The oceans were full of dissolved iron, and oxygen immediately combined with it, forming rust. These chemical reactions built up enormous layers of banded iron formations, which today provide much of the iron mined for steel. According to research in Precambrian research, these rocks record the moment oxygen first interacted with the environment on a massive scale. The buildup of oxygen was slow and uneven. For hundreds of millions of years, cyanobacteria continued producing oxygen, but it vanished quickly as it reacted with iron, sulfur, and volcanic gases. Only after these sinks were filled could oxygen start accumulating in the air. When it finally did, the consequences were dramatic. The Great Oxidation Event poisoned many of the microbes that had thrived without oxygen. For them, this gas was toxic. In fact, oxygen is a highly reactive chemical that can damage cells if not carefully controlled. Whole groups of ancient microbes were driven to extinction or forced into oxygen-free pockets underground and underwater, where some of their descendants still survive today. Yet for other life forms, oxygen opened incredible possibilities. Higher oxygen levels meant more efficient energy production inside cells. Instead of barely scraping by, organisms could suddenly afford to grow larger and more complex. Some scientists suggest that without this step, multicellular life might never have evolved. A paper in Philosophical Transactions of the Royal Society B even described oxygen as the spark that lit the fuse of complexity. The link between air and temperature is one of the best insights about this time. The Earth lost a strong warming gas when oxygen replaced methane in the air. Carbon dioxide doesn't keep heat in as well as methane does. Because there was less gas, Earth cooled down a lot. From glacial layers, we can tell that this cold may have caused the first snowball Earth events, in which ice stretched close to the equator. Imagine that the amount of oxygen in the air went up and caused whole countries to freeze. Life barely made it through these deep freezes. The fact that oxygen affects temperature makes us think about how science and biology can change the whole world. Isotopes of sulfur are another notable piece of proof. Chemical patterns found in rocks older than 2.4 billion years can only have formed in a world without air. Those signs go away after the Great Oxidation Event and are replaced by patterns that make sense with oxygen. This is like a mark for geochemists. It helps them figure out exactly when the change happened. Geochimica et Cosmochimica Acta talks about these small isotopic clues that show how deeply oxygen changed Earth's processes, from the atmosphere to the ocean bottom. The rise of oxygen also changed the color and chemistry of the oceans. Beforehand, seas were greenish and murky, full of iron and sulfur compounds. As oxygen increased, iron rusted out and settled to the sea floor. leaving clearer waters that allowed sunlight to penetrate. This shift may have boosted photosynthesis even further, creating a positive feedback loop. The snowball Earth episodes. It doesn't look like Earth could be frozen over at first glance. It looks too warm and safe, but proof shows that the Earth went through at least 2 ice ages, hundreds of millions of years before the dinosaurs. These ice ages were so bad that glaciers may have reached the equator. These events, called the snowball Earth episodes, took place in the Cryogenian era, which was around 720 to 635 million years ago. Scientists disagreed for many years about whether Earth was completely frozen or only partly frozen with small open seas near the tropics on the edges. In either case, life had to survive conditions that were much worse than anything the Earth has seen since. The evidence comes from unusual rock formations. In Namibia, Canada, and Australia, geologists have discovered glacial deposits, layers of rocks dropped by ice, sitting directly on top of tropical limestone reefs. This strange pairing shows that glaciers once advanced into regions that were clearly warm before the freeze. In addition, some of these glacial rocks are capped with sudden layers of carbonate, called cap carbonates. These were laid down when the ice melted rapidly, and oceans returned to greenhouse conditions. According to studies in Science and Nature Geoscience, this pattern provides a clear signature of global-scale freezing, followed by dramatic warming. But how could Earth plunge into such extremes? One key trigger was the drawdown of carbon dioxide. As continents drifted into tropical regions, rainfall and chemical weathering of rocks accelerated, pulling carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. With less of this greenhouse gas, global temperatures dropped. Once ice sheets expanded, they reflected sunlight back into space, causing even more cooling in a runaway effect. Scientists call this the ice albedo feedback, and it may have locked Earth into a frozen state for millions of years. For life, these were near-apocalyptic conditions. Most of the oceans were covered by thick ice, blocking sunlight and cutting off photosynthesis. Yet life did not vanish. Microbes found refuges in cracks within the ice, around hydrothermal vents, and in small pockets of liquid water. Research published in Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences suggests that green algae may have survived in thin meltwater layers just below the ice surface, similar to communities living today in Antarctic sea ice. These refuges kept the biosphere alive, allowing life to rebound once the world thawed. The thaw itself was just as dramatic as the freeze. With volcanoes continuing to erupt during the glaciation, carbon dioxide gradually built up in the atmosphere. With little weathering happening under the ice, the gas was not removed. After millions of years, levels may have risen to hundreds of times higher than today's. Eventually, this intense greenhouse effect melted the ice in a geologically short time, perhaps within a few thousand years. The resulting floods and chemical changes left the cap carbonate layers that geologists now use as markers of the event. The link to how animals have changed over time is an unseen value of snowball Earth research. The Ediacaran period began soon after the last Cryogenian glaciation finished, which was about 635 million years ago. This is when the first big, complicated creatures with many cells showed up. Some scientists think that the great stress of global cooling slowed down evolution and forced survivors to come up with new ideas. During the deglaciation, oxygen levels also went up because of the flow of nutrients from melting glaciers. These changes may have sparked the growth of complex life, which in turn led to the Cambrian boom. The role of gas is another thing that is often left out. Think that methane made by microbes helped keep Earth warm before the snowball events. However, a small increase in oxygen levels turned methane into carbon dioxide, which is a less powerful warming gas. This change may have made Earth's heat blanket weaker, which allowed major glaciers to form. Geology studies from today show that this delicate balance between oxygen and methane worked like a thermostat for the world. The Cambrian explosion, life's first big bang. Most of Earth's past life could not be seen with the naked eye. For billions of years, microbes ran the world and slowly changed the oceans and atmosphere. Then, about 541 million years ago, something very strange took place. Life became very different and complicated in a very short time in natural terms, about 20 to 25 million years. The Cambrian explosion brought a lot of strange and different animals into the seas. Many of them look more like monsters from science fiction than real life. To picture the Cambrian seas, think of a coral reef without the colored fish. Instead, picture armored worms, animals that look like spiny jellyfish, and predators with mouths full of spinning teeth. The famous Burgess Shale fossils from Canada show this strange environment in a lot of detail. One of the animals was Anomalocaris, a hunter that was almost a meter long and had spiked limbs for grabbing and a round mouth with teeth that looked like a pineapple. Opabinia had 5 eyes and a long, bendable nose with claws on the end of it. Even though these creatures were very different from living things today, they were some of the first tests of how to build complex bodies. The key innovation of the Cambrian period was the arrival of hard body parts. Before this, most animals were soft-bodied and left few fossils. But with the evolution of shells, exoskeletons and spines, animals suddenly had defense mechanisms against predators. Trilobites, with their segmented bodies and armored shells, became one of the most successful groups of the era. This arms race between predator and prey pushed life to evolve faster than ever before. Studies in the Annual Review of Earth and Planetary Sciences suggest that the pressure of predation was a major driving force behind the explosion. By this time, Earth's atmosphere had higher oxygen levels than in earlier eons. Oxygen allows animals to grow larger and power more active lifestyles, such as swimming and hunting. Without enough oxygen, the energy demands of muscles, nervous systems, and complex organs could not be met. A paper in Nature Geoscience highlights that rising oxygen levels were likely a key trigger that enabled animals to break free from their microscopic ancestors. Fossils show that trilobites and other Cambrian creatures developed compound eyes with multiple lenses, similar to those of modern insects. The ability to see changed everything. Predators could now spot prey from a distance, and prey had to adapt by burrowing, swimming faster, or developing armor. This visual revolution transformed ecosystems into complex webs of hunting, hiding, and survival. It's no exaggeration to say that vision was as groundbreaking as the invention of fire for humans. It reshaped the entire structure of life. Hidden within this explosion were evolutionary experiments that failed. Many Cambrian creatures represent dead-end lineages, strange body plans that vanished without descendants. Hallucigenia, for instance, was a tiny worm-like animal with spines sticking up from its back and legs that looked like stilts. At first, scientists even reconstructed it upside down. Today, it is seen as a distant relative of velvet worms, but most of its weird cousins disappeared forever. These forgotten experiments show that evolution is not a straight ladder, but more like a branching bush with countless twigs that never survived. In the Cambrian, animals began burrowing into the seafloor, churning up mud and altering ecosystems. This behavior, known as the substrate revolution, destroyed the microbial mats that had dominated for billions of years. In other words, animals literally tore up the foundation of the old world and replaced it with something new. This change, described in Lithia Journal, marks one of the first examples of animals reshaping entire environments through their behavior. The Cambrian explosion also gave rise to the first vertebrates. Tiny, jawless fish with cartilage skeletons and simple fins swam alongside trilobites and worms. Though unimpressive compared to later sharks and bony fish, these pioneers marked the beginning of a lineage that would eventually lead to amphibians, reptiles, dinosaurs, and mammals. The Cambrian explosion is very compelling because of both the strange animals that lived during it and how quickly things changed. Life stayed the same for billions of years. Then, evolution sped up so quickly that it was like a blink in natural time. Scientists are still not sure why it happened at that time. Was the air level rising? New hunter-prey relationships? Genetic progress, such as the discovery of Hox genes that drive body plans? All of these things coming together at the right time could be the answer. The Ordovician seized trilobites and early reefs. Around 485 million years ago, the Earth entered the Ordovician age. This was after the Cambrian explosion, which brought strange new creatures into the seas. This time isn't given as much attention as the Cambrian, but it was just as important. It was during the Ordovician period that trilobites, crabs, and the first large reefs that looked like coral grew in the seas. In the Ordovician, ecosystems became stable, balanced, and very diverse. The Cambrian was the invention stage of animal life, and the Ordovician was the expansion stage. The oceans at this time covered much of the continents, turning shallow seas into hotspots of life. The warm climate and high sea levels created wide continental shelves where sunlight could reach the seabed. These shallow waters became nurseries for marine animals. The diversity of life expanded dramatically. Studies published in Lithia Journal describe the Ordovician radiation as one of the greatest biodiversification events in Earth's history, rivaling even the Cambrian explosion. Trilobites, already successful in the Cambrian, continued to flourish. These armored arthropods scuttled across the sea floor in massive numbers. They weren't just single types. There were hundreds of species, some small as coins, others the size of a dinner plate. Some developed defensive spines, while others grew smoother shells to burrow into sand. Fossil evidence shows trilobites molted their shells, leaving behind ghostly remains that littered the seafloor like discarded armor. Hidden within their diversity were early signs of specialization. Some trilobites filtered food from mud, while others hunted small worms. Alongside trilobites rose the first great reef builders. Unlike today's coral reefs built by stony corals, Ordovician reefs were made by organisms called bryozoans and tabulate corals, along with sponges known as stromatoporoids. These reefs stretched for hundreds of kilometers and supported entire ecosystems. They offered hiding places for small fish-like creatures and anchored seaweed-like algae. Research in paleogeography, paleoclimatology, paleoecology highlights how these reefs stabilized coastlines and created three-dimensional habitats long before tropical coral reefs as we know them. The Ordovician seas had giant filter feeders, graptolites, colonial animals that looked like tiny saw blade structures, floated through the oceans. They may not look impressive, but their fossils are incredibly important. Geologists use them as index fossils to date rock layers because they evolved so quickly and spread so widely. Graptolites tell us not only about Ordovician life, but also help geologists build a precise timeline of Earth's history. Meanwhile, some of the earliest true vertebrates began to appear. Jawless fish with armored plates, called ostracoderms, swam slowly in these seas. Though primitive, they marked a new step toward the dominance of vertebrates. Their bony armor protected them from trilobite claws and other predators. Studies in nature describe these early fish as crucial evolutionary experiments, paving the way for the eventual rise of jawed fish and later all vertebrate animals. The Ordovician also saw strange echinoderms, relatives of starfish, flourish. Some grew stalks and resembled flowers anchored to the sea floor, while others drifted freely. Many of these early echinoderms vanished in later extinctions, leaving little connection to modern sea stars, but they filled the oceans with unusual body designs that looked like living sculptures. Climate played a major role in shaping these seas. The Ordovician world was warm, with high levels of carbon dioxide. This greenhouse climate encouraged biodiversity, but it also made ecosystems vulnerable. Toward the end of the period, a sudden ice age struck when Gondwana, a massive southern continent, drifted over the South Pole. Glaciers expanded, sea levels dropped, and shallow seas vanished. This collapse triggered the Ordovician-Silurian extinction, one of the big 5 mass extinctions in Earth's history. About 85% of marine species disappeared, including many trilobites and reef builders. There is an undetected value in the chemical marks on rocks. Carbon cycles changed over time, as shown by isotope signs found in Ordovician limestones. These signs demonstrate how the world was constantly changed by things like volcanic activity, weathering, and living things. Geology magazine researchers say that these changes in the carbon cycle led to both more species and species going extinct, showing how fragile the balance of life was. The first mass extinction Ordovician-Silurian event. Life on Earth had its first big problem about 444 million years ago. The end of the Ordovician period was terrible. The Ordovician period had been a great time for trilobites, reefs, and wildlife. About 85% of all sea species died out during the Ordovician-Silurian extinction, which is what experts call it. It set the tone for the Big 5 major extinctions that would happen over and over again in history. Later extinctions, like the one that killed the dinosaurs, are better known. But this first mass death was just as dramatic and changed the course of life in ways we don't always understand. The trigger was a sudden and unexpected climate shift. During the late Ordovician, the supercontinent Gondwana drifted over the South Pole. Ice sheets began to form, growing into massive glaciers that locked away huge amounts of water. Global sea levels dropped by over 100 meters. Shallow seas that had once been teeming ecosystems disappeared, leaving coral reefs, trilobite nurseries, and countless shelled animals stranded and dying. Research published in Geology shows how these falling sea levels left behind exposed seafloors, cutting off habitats that had been critical to biodiversity. As the climate cooled, ocean circulation changed. Cold water carries less oxygen, and circulation patterns slowed, creating widespread dead zones. Many organisms that relied on oxygenated shallow waters suffocated. Trilobites, brachiopods, and graptolites were especially hard hit. Graptolite fossils, which had once been abundant and diverse, became rare in the aftermath, and entire groups of trilobites vanished forever. This extinction is the role of volcanism. Some studies in Earth and planetary science letters suggest that massive volcanic eruptions may have added to the chaos. Volcanic gases could have triggered short-term warming episodes that alternated with cooling phases. This rapid climate whiplash may have stressed ecosystems already weakened by glaciation. Life not only had to cope with freezing conditions, but also with sudden rebounds of greenhouse heat. For organisms adapted to stable Ordovician seas, such instability was devastating. The extinction also hit reef ecosystems hard. Before this event, Ordovician reefs built by sponges and corals had stretched for kilometers, but as seas retreated and conditions shifted, these reefs collapsed. Reefs did not fully recover for tens of millions of years, showing just how sensitive these ecosystems were. A study in paleobiology notes that this collapse reshaped marine environments, clearing space for entirely new reef-building organisms in later eras. Carbon isotopes preserved in Ordovician rocks show large swings during this extinction. These swings point to major disruptions in the carbon cycle, likely linked to massive burial of organic material as seas retreated. These chemical fingerprints provide scientists with a timeline of events, showing that the extinction happened in two main pulses. The first pulse was driven by glaciation and sea level fall, while the second came during the rapid warming when glaciers melted. It wasn't one catastrophe, but a double blow that few species could withstand. For the survivors, the extinction reshaped the evolutionary landscape. Groups that had been minor players suddenly rose in importance. Jawless fish, for example, survived and gradually expanded into niches left vacant by shelled invertebrates. Some trilobites managed to persist, but their diversity never fully recovered. The extinction also cleared the way for the Silurian period's new ecosystems, including the earliest land plants and more advanced fishes. In other words, the disaster both destroyed and created opportunities, a reminder of how extinction can act as an engine of change. The size of this event is what makes it so distinctive. At that time, the seas were home to all known complicated life. Later extinctions also killed off land animals, but this one killed off species from all over the world. In historical words, picture whole shallow seas full of trilobites, reefs and mollusks going away almost overnight. It's like a page from Earth's book of life has been taken out when fossil beds that are full of different kinds of fossils below the extinction boundary become silent above it. The Silurian Revolution. Rise of early plants and fishes. Earth began the Silurian period about 443 million years ago, after the first mass extinction, which caused a lot of damage. Life was hurt, but it didn't stay hurt for long. The Silurian era was marked by quiet changes. Plants spread out over land, changing the shape of rivers and coasts. Jaws and fins helped fish become the dominant species in the seas. While it wasn't as exciting as later ages, the Silurian was a turning point. It was the time when Earth started to look a bit more like the living world we know today. One of the biggest breakthroughs was the colonization of land by plants. Before this, continents were barren landscapes of rock and sand. The only life existed in the oceans. Then small moss-like plants began to appear along riverbanks and damp soils. Fossils of these pioneers, such as Cooksonia, show tiny stems only a few centimeters tall with simple spore capsules at the tips. They had no leaves or roots, but they were tough enough to survive outside the water. Research in the Review of Paleobotany and Palynology explains how these early plants stabilized soils, reduced erosion, and helped trap carbon dioxide. Even though they were small, they started a quiet environmental revolution. By spreading across land, plants began altering the atmosphere itself. Through photosynthesis, they drew in carbon dioxide and released oxygen. This shift in gases not only cooled the climate, but also created conditions for larger animals to breathe. Plants also shaded soils and trapped moisture, building the first primitive ecosystems on land. The landscapes of the Silurian would still look alien to us. No trees, no grass, just scattered mats of green clinging to damp ground. But it was the first step toward forests. In the seas, fish were undergoing their own transformation. During the Ordovician, most fish had been jawless and slow-moving, covered in bony plates for protection. In the Silurian, some groups developed jaws. This innovation changed everything. Jaws allowed fish to bite, tear, and chew rather than simply filter food. Suddenly, they could become predators. Placoderms, heavily armored fish with powerful jaws, appeared during this time and quickly rose in dominance. According to studies in nature, the development of jaws was one of the most important evolutionary steps in vertebrate history. Without it, later predators from sharks to lions would never have existed. Fins also became more advanced. Early fish began developing paired fins that allowed them to steer more effectively. This gave them greater control in swimming, turning them from sluggish bottom dwellers into active hunters. Fossils of early sharks from Silurian deposits show streamlined bodies built for speed. Although these sharks were small compared to later giants, they represented a brand new way of living in the seas. Coral reefs were another change that was dismissed. There were no reefs in the Ordovician demise, but they came back in the Silurian. Tabulate corals and stromatoporoid sponges were the main ones who built reefs that were kilometers long. These reefs were havens for life, with groups of shellfish, trilobites, and early fish living together. During the Silurian period, reefs got so big that they wouldn't be seen again until the Mesozoic, when modern corals started to grow. They made places for different kinds of life to thrive and set the stage for marine ecosystems we still know today. The Silurian climate also contributed to recovery. After the ice ages of the late Ordovician, Earth warmed and sea levels rose again. Shallow seas spread across continents, creating wide areas of habitat. These seas were calm compared to the turbulent events that had come before, giving life the stability it needed to diversify. Fossil records from places like Gotland in Sweden show layer upon layer of reef and marine deposits, capturing a world steadily rebuilding itself. The role of early soils is an intriguing point that isn't widely known. As plants spread across the land, their dead parts started to break down and make the first organic soils. The nutrients in these soils got washed into rivers and seas when it rained. This food input may have helped plankton grow, which in turn helped fish numbers. In this way, the presence of plants that looked like moss on land changed oceanic environments. It was the first time in Earth's history that land and sea were linked. The Devonian Age of Fishes. People often call the Devonian time, which happened between 419 and 359 million years ago, the Age of Fishes. The name is well deserved. During this time, fish changed into an amazing array of shapes and sizes, bringing hunters, grazers, and armored giants to the seas, rivers, and lakes. However, the Devonian wasn't just about fish. It was also the time when the first trees grew, insects showed up, and animals started to test life on land. In this world, people tried new things and environments got more complicated and rich than ever before. The oceans of the Devonian were full of remarkable fish. Placoderms, armored fish with bony plates covering their heads and bodies, ruled the seas. Some placoderms grew to enormous sizes like Dunkleosteus, which could reach lengths of over 8 meters. With its powerful jaws and bladed plates that acted like shears, it was one of the first true apex predators. Fossils studied in Proceedings of the Royal Society B reveal bite forces strong enough to slice through the armor of other placoderms, making Dunkleosteus a terror of its age. Sharks also appeared during the Devonian, but they looked different from the sleek hunters we imagine today. Early sharks like Cladocellache were smaller, lacked many of the features of modern sharks, and had broad fins. Still, They represented the beginning of a lineage that would survive every extinction event and continue to the present day. Meanwhile, lobe-finned fishes developed fleshy, muscular fins supported by bones. These fins were the precursors of arms and legs, making lobe fins the ancestors of all tetrapods. Fossils like Eusthenopteron and later Tiktaalik show how these fishes were gradually preparing for the leap to land. Ray-finned fishes, the group that today includes most fish species, also emerged in the Devonian. Unlike lobe fins, their fins were supported by thin rays rather than sturdy bones. This design proved incredibly successful for swimming efficiency and eventually allowed ray fins to dominate aquatic ecosystems. A study in Nature describes the Devonian as the true branching point, where vertebrate diversity exploded, splitting into lineages that still define our world. While fish grabbed the headlines, land was undergoing its own transformation. The first true forests appeared, filled with towering plants like lycophytes, horsetails, and early seed ferns. Some of these trees reached 30 meters in height, dwarfing earlier moss-like pioneers. Their roots penetrated deep into the soil, stabilizing landscapes and influencing rivers. Before forests, rivers tended to be shallow and braided, constantly shifting their courses. With deep-rooted trees holding soil together, meandering river systems like those we see today began to appear. This change in landscapes is described in Geology Journal as one of the most profound environmental shifts in Earth's history. These forests also had a global effect on climate. By pulling carbon dioxide from the air and pumping oxygen into the atmosphere, plants cooled the planet. Their fallen leaves and wood became buried, creating some of the world's first coal deposits. This process drastically altered the carbon cycle and may have set the stage for the Devonian's late extinction events. The greening of the continents shows how life on land could reshape the entire Earth system. Insects also made their first appearance in the Devonian. Fossil evidence from Scotland shows primitive wingless insects crawling through forest litter. Though tiny and overlooked compared to armored fish, they were critical pioneers. These insects likely fed on decaying plant matter, beginning the recycling systems that still drive ecosystems today. Their presence shows that once plants took root on land, animals soon followed to take advantage of the new habitats. But there was a problem at the end of the Devonian. The late Devonian extinction is the name for a group of extinction events that happened at the same time. The growth of woods was a big reason for this. As trees grew, they spilled minerals into the oceans and rivers. These nutrients caused algae growth, which took oxygen out of the water. Marine life was killed by large dead zones. Placoderms, which used to rule the seas, never got better. They were gone for good by the end of the Devonian. Geological Society of America. Bulletin research shows that the very success of life, forests growing and changing chemistry, led to the collapse of the ecosystem. The Devonian extinction planetary crisis from plants. During the Devonian age, new things started to happen. Fish ruled the seas, forests spread across countries, and bugs started to crawl on land. Happiness did not come free, though. It's possible that the plants that changed the Earth's surface also caused one of the worst mass extinctions in history. Things went wrong between 375 and 360 million years ago, and they are all known together as the Late Devonian extinction. About 75% of all species have gone extinct. It wasn't a single disaster like the one that killed the dinosaurs. Instead, it was a long-lasting battle in a world where life itself failed. The spread of forests was central to the crisis. Before the Devonian, most plants were small, moss-like pioneers. By mid-Devonian times, tall trees with deep roots appeared, including lycophytes and seed ferns. Their roots dug into bedrock, breaking down minerals and releasing nutrients into rivers. When rains washed these nutrients into lakes and seas, they fueled massive blooms of algae. At first, these blooms may have seemed harmless, but as algae died, bacteria consumed them and stripped oxygen from the water. This process, called eutrophication, created enormous dead zones, where fish and invertebrates suffocated. Modern scientists have observed similar processes in polluted lakes today, but during the Devonian, it happened on a planetary scale. Evidence for these anoxic seas comes from black shale deposits rich in organic matter. These rocks formed when oxygen was absent from the seafloor, preserving organic remains instead of allowing them to rot. Studies in the Geological Society of America Bulletin link widespread black shales directly to late Devonian extinctions, showing that oceans repeatedly lost oxygen during this time. In other words, the seas became hostile not because of an external asteroid or volcano alone, but because of forests on land altering nutrient cycles. The drop in carbon dioxide was another cause. The greenhouse effect became less strong as trees took in CO2 for photosynthesis and stored it in their woody parts. After that, the whole world cooled down, and there is proof that ice spread across some of Gondwana, the southern supercontinent. Rapid cooling and seas that were low on oxygen made settings that were unstable and stressed. Paleogeography, paleoclimatology, and paleoecology research shows that changes between cooling and warming events were especially bad for species that couldn't shift quickly enough. The victims included entire groups of successful organisms. Placoderms, the armored fishes that had dominated for millions of years, disappeared. Trilobites suffered heavy losses, with many lineages vanishing forever. Reef systems collapsed as well. Before the Devonian crisis, reefs built by stromatoporoid sponges and corals stretched for kilometers. Afterward, reef building nearly ceased for over 100 million years, leaving oceans without large coral ecosystems until the rise of modern corals much later. Yet the extinction was uneven. Some groups survived and even flourished afterward. Jawed fish like sharks and rayfins pulled through, adapting to oxygen-poor waters. Lobe-finned fish also survived, and some of them began venturing onto land. Fossils such as Tiktaalik show how these survivors experimented with limbs and lungs, opening the path for the first true tetrapods. Ironically, while the ocean suffered, the crises may have accelerated life's conquest of land. The time is what caused this extinction. It wasn't a single event, but a series of waves. Geologists have found at least 2 major extinction peaks that happened millions of years apart. The length of time says that Earth was stuck in a feedback loop. Carbon cycles were changed by forests, which in turn changed the temperature, killed species, remade ecosystems, and so on. It wasn't just one blow, it set off a chain of events. Because it was so complicated, the Devonian extinction is one of a kind. There is also evidence that volcanic activity played a supporting role. The Vilui traps in Siberia released vast amounts of lava and gas during the late Devonian. These eruptions may have injected sulfur aerosols that cooled the climate and carbon dioxide that warmed it again later. Such swings would have stressed ecosystems already weakened by nutrient-driven anoxia. Still, most researchers agree that the true driver was the rise of deep-rooted forests, a case of life rewriting the rules of the planet and paying the price. The Carboniferous rainforest world. The Carboniferous period began about 359 to 299 million years ago and was one of the most unusual times in Earth's history. Its name comes from the huge amounts of coal that were made during this time, but the Carboniferous is really known for its huge swampy jungles. These woods covered countries and were ruled by tall plants that aren't found today. It was hot, there was a lot of oxygen in the air, and there were huge insects and frogs everywhere. You would be in a lost Earth that shaped much of our modern environment if you walked into a Carboniferous forest. It would be both strangely familiar and very different from where you are now. The most captivating aspect about the Carboniferous world was its plants. Herons, horsetails, and plants that were up to 30 meters tall grew into forests. The trees' stems were straight and didn't spread out. They ended in crowns of leaves. They didn't have thick wood like modern trees do. Instead, they were strong because they had layers of bark-like tissue. These plants did best in areas that were swampy and had rivers that spilled and kept the soil wet. When they died, their bodies ended up in swamps with little air, where they broke down slowly. It took millions of years for this underground plant matter to get hard enough to form the coal seams that power businesses today. A study in Proceedings of the Royal Society B says that the Carboniferous swamps were the biggest place on Earth where carbon was buried all at once. The air itself was different. Oxygen levels rose to around 30–35%, compared to 21% today. This surplus of oxygen had astonishing effects. Insects and arthropods grew to enormous sizes because their breathing system, tiny tubes called trachea, worked more efficiently in oxygen-rich air. Fossils reveal dragonflies with wingspans of over 70 centimeters, millipedes more than 2 meters long, and giant scorpions roaming the undergrowth. These mega-insects were not monsters, but natural outcomes of atmospheric chemistry. Research in nature suggests that high oxygen was the main driver of their gigantism, since their respiratory systems had no need to evolve lungs. Amphibians also flourished. With moist forests and abundant water, they diversified into many forms, some as large as crocodiles. They were the dominant land vertebrates, hunting insects and smaller amphibians in swampy rivers and lagoons. Hidden in their ranks, however, were the first reptiles. These small, lizard-like creatures developed the amniotic egg, which allowed embryos to develop away from water. This single innovation freed their descendants from dependence on swamps and marked the beginning of the reptilian line that would later give rise to dinosaurs and mammals. The Carboniferous rainforests were not uniform. They spread across vast equatorial regions of what is now North America, Europe, and Asia, creating what scientists call the coal forests. These ecosystems supported complex food webs. Insects fed on decaying plants, amphibians hunted insects, and reptiles crept along the forest floor. Dense vegetation created layered habitats, much like modern rainforests, though the plants were entirely different. Walking through these forests, you would see towering club mosses where trees should be, and spore-bearing ferns where you expect flowers. Flowering plants would not evolve until much later. Climate played a key role in this lush world. The Carboniferous began warm, with high sea levels that created widespread swamps. Later, during the late Carboniferous, ice sheets expanded across Gondwana, leading to cooler, drier conditions. This shift fragmented the vast coal forests into isolated patches. Known as the Carboniferous rainforest collapse, this event reduced biodiversity and altered evolutionary paths. Amphibians, dependent on wet habitats, suffered greatly, while reptiles, better suited for drier conditions, gained an advantage. Studies in Geology Journal emphasize that this collapse was one of the pivotal moments in vertebrate history, tipping dominance away from amphibians toward reptiles. This period is the link between coal formation and global climate regulation. By locking away vast amounts of carbon in coal beds, the Carboniferous forests reduced greenhouse gases, contributing to cooling and the eventual ice ages. It was one of the first times life altered the global climate on such a scale. In many ways, these forests acted as Earth's lungs, pulling carbon from the air and storing it underground for hundreds of millions of years. The Carboniferous world also shows how environments we know today got their start. There was more competition, predation, and area specialization. Insects got wings so they could get away from danger and discover new places. This was one of the most important steps forward in development at the time. Giant ferns and horsetails would grow in a forest. Early morning flying insects would buzz through the trees and across the swampy ground, following shafts of sunlight. The rise of amphibians and the first reptiles. Not only were the Carboniferous woods lush environments, but they were also places where big changes began. This is where animals made one of the most important developmental steps. They took over land. Amphibians, which first showed up in the Devonian period, became the main hunters in these swampy areas. From their group came the first lizards, who brought with them an important new idea that would change the balance of life forever: the amniotic egg. Amphibians were perfectly suited for the warm, wet Carboniferous climate. They lived both in water and on land, laying eggs in ponds and rivers. Some resembled modern salamanders, while others grew as large as crocodiles. Fossils like Eriops and Archegosaurus show powerful jaws, sprawling limbs, and bodies built for ambush hunting. They lurked in swamps, waiting to snap up fish, insects, or even smaller amphibians. These giants were the top predators of their age. Yet amphibians had limitations. Their eggs lacked protective shells, so they had to remain near water. Their moist skins also tied them to damp environments, making them vulnerable to droughts. This dependence would eventually cost them dominance as Earth's climate shifted. But during the Carboniferous, they thrived, filling ecological roles that later reptiles and mammals would inherit. The real stars of this time, though, were the early lizards. The first known lizards were small and lizard-like and lived about 315 million years ago. The hylonymous fossil from Canada's coal forests lets us see what these early people looked like. Hylonymous, which was only 20 centimeters long, looked for bugs in the bushes. It wasn't very big, but the biology behind it was a big step forward that would last longer than the rule of giant frogs. That breakthrough was the amniotic egg. Unlike amphibian eggs, which required water, amniotic eggs had protective membranes and shells that held in moisture. This allowed reptiles to lay eggs on land without fear of them drying out. Inside the egg, different membranes managed waste, gas exchange, and nutrition, creating a self-contained life support system. Studies in paleobiology call this innovation one of the most significant in evolutionary history. With it, reptiles broke free from the water's tether and gained access to drier environments. The amniotic egg also allowed for larger, more developed offspring. While amphibians produced larvae that had to metamorphose into adults, reptiles hatched as miniature versions of themselves, already adapted to land. This gave them a survival advantage in unpredictable environments. As climates shifted in the late Carboniferous and swamps began to fragment, reptiles were better equipped to survive. Another key adaptation was skin. Amphibians had thin, permeable skin that lost water easily. Reptiles developed tougher, keratin-rich scales that acted as armor and reduced water loss. Combined with the amniotic egg, this adaptation meant reptiles could spread into habitats amphibians couldn't handle. It was a quiet revolution, no dramatic takeover at first, but a steady expansion into new niches. Fossils also show the beginnings of diversity within early reptiles. Some developed into synapsids, a group that would eventually give rise to mammals. Others became diapsids, the ancestors of lizards, snakes, crocodiles, and dinosaurs. The split between these two lineages began during the Carboniferous and Permian, setting the evolutionary stage for all future land vertebrates. A paper in the Journal of Evolutionary Biology emphasizes how these early divergences planted the seeds for both mammalian and reptilian dominance in later eras. A fascinating point that isn't widely known is that frogs tried out different body shapes during this time. Some got long bodies like eels so they could swim, while others got broad heads so they could hide and hunt. But unlike animals, their tests were limited because they needed water. Reptiles didn't have to worry about these kinds of limits because they didn't need to reproduce in water. The Carboniferous rainforest collapse around 305 million years ago highlighted this difference. As climates cooled and forests fragmented, amphibians lost much of their habitat. Many groups declined or vanished. Reptiles, however, adapted to the drier conditions and expanded. This moment marked the quiet handover of dominance from amphibians to reptiles, a shift that would echo for hundreds of millions of years. The Permian supercontinent Pangaea. Earth looked very different at the start of the Permian period, which began about 299 million years ago. In earlier times, the continents were spread out, but now they have joined together to form one huge island called Pangaea. This supercontinent changed the world temperature, the way ocean currents flow, and the environments that are both lush and hostile. It stretched almost from pole to pole. Pangaea wasn't just a big piece of land. It was a force that created new kinds of life and then caused one of the biggest mass extinctions in Earth's history. The formation of Pangaea was the result of continental drift. Over millions of years, tectonic plates carried smaller land masses into collisions, welding them together. The process built enormous mountain ranges, such as the Appalachians in North America and the Urals in Russia. These ranges are still visible today as the ancient scars of Pangaea's birth. According to research in paleogeography, paleoclimatology, paleoecology, the joining of continents also squeezed shallow seas out of existence, leaving vast stretches of dry land in their place. The sheer size of the supercontinent meant that much of its interior lay far from the moderating effects of the ocean. This created extreme seasonal swings, scorching summers, freezing winters, and long dry spells. Deserts spread across central Pangaea, forming some of the largest arid regions Earth has ever known. Fossilized sand dunes in what is now North America testify to these ancient deserts. At the same time, coastal regions and mountain valleys supported lush forests, showing how diverse climates coexisted on a single landmass. The joining of continents also changed ocean circulation. With most land grouped into one hemisphere, The surrounding Panthalassa Ocean covered the rest of the globe. This vast ocean had its own giant current systems, while a smaller inland sea, the Tethys, provided tropical habitats. These shifts in currents likely influenced global temperatures and nutrient flows, creating both challenges and opportunities for marine life. On land, the ecosystems of Pangaea were unlike anything before. The early Permian was dominated by dense forests of seed ferns and conifers, plants better adapted to drier conditions than the swamp-loving lycophytes of the Carboniferous. These plants created new habitats for animals that could handle less moisture. Reptiles, already on the rise, flourished in this world. Amphibians, tied to water, retreated to wetter regions and began to lose their former dominance. Among reptiles, synapsids became especially important. Synapsids are the lineage that eventually gave rise to mammals, and during the Permian, they were the top predators and herbivores of Pangaea. Creatures like Dimetrodon, with its iconic sail-like back, prowled the deserts, hunting smaller reptiles and amphibians. Herbivorous synapsids like Edaphosaurus grazed on tough vegetation. These animals filled roles later taken by dinosaurs, showing that Pangaea was already experimenting with large land-dwelling vertebrates. Studies in the Journal of Evolutionary Biology emphasize that synapsids dominated ecosystems long before true dinosaurs even existed. Another fascinating detail about Pangaea is that it helped species spread. Animals could move across huge distances if all countries were linked. Similar types of plants and animals lived in places that are now very far apart, like South America and Africa, as shown by fossils. This global connection made regions less diverse, but it let powerful groups spread far and wide. On the other hand, deserts and mountains, which are very different from each other, forced some species to develop new traits, forming hotspots for evolution. Yet Pangaea was not a stable paradise. Its size made it vulnerable to environmental extremes. Seasonal monsoons swept across its coasts, while droughts plagued the interior. Fluctuations in climate stressed ecosystems. By the late Permian, massive volcanic eruptions in Siberia worsened the situation, releasing gases that destabilized the atmosphere and oceans. Though these eruptions came later, Pangaea's geography had already primed Earth for vulnerability by concentrating land and life in limited regions. The Permian faunas, the pre-dinosaur titans. Many people think of Earth as a boring, empty place before the dinosaurs. They want the real stars to come out. The truth is not like that at all. Titans lived in the Permian period, which lasted from about 299 million years ago to 252 million years ago. These were animals that ruled the land, the sea, and the sky long before dinosaurs did. These animals were not test versions or studies that didn't work. They were strong and successful, and sometimes they were stranger than any animal. At the top of the food chain stood the synapsids, often called mammal-like reptiles, though that name is misleading. They weren't true reptiles, and they weren't mammals either. They were their own lineage, and during the Permian, they ruled the land. The most famous of them is Dimetrodon, instantly recognizable by the huge sail rising from its back. At up to 4 meters long, it was a fearsome predator with serrated teeth perfect for slicing flesh. For years, people mistook Dimetrodon for a dinosaur, but it actually lived more than 40 million years before the first dinosaurs appeared. The sail of Dimetrodon remains one of the great mysteries. Some scientists think it helps regulate body temperature by absorbing or releasing heat. Others believe it was used for display, warning rivals, or attracting mates. Research in the Journal of Morphology suggests that the sail's blood vessel patterns support both functions, showing that even Permian predators combined survival with social signaling. Dimetrodon wasn't alone. Herbivorous synapsids, like Edaphosaurus, also carried sails, but theirs were covered in crossbars, giving them a different look. These plant eaters browsed on tough vegetation, filling the same ecological roles that later dinosaurs like iguanodonts would hold. Other synapsids, such as dicynodonts, had beak-like mouths and tusks, resembling nothing alive today. Dicynodonts were surprisingly successful, spreading across Pangaea and surviving even after the Permian into the Triassic. But synapsids weren't the only stars. The Permian also produced the gorgonopsids, a group of terrifying predators with long, saber-like canine teeth. Some grew as large as modern lions and were agile hunters, built for speed rather than brute force. Their skulls show large openings behind the eyes, suggesting strong jaw muscles. Studies in Acta Paleontologica Polonica highlight their advanced predatory adaptations, placing them among the most efficient hunters before dinosaurs. Herbivorous giants also appeared. Pariasaurs, massive reptiles with knobby skulls and heavy bodies, lumbered across the Permian landscapes. Some reached lengths of 3 meters and were covered in bony plates, possibly for defense. Their fossils are found in Africa, Russia, and China, showing that they spread widely across Pangaea. Despite their bulk, pariasaurs were plant eaters, shaping vegetation patterns much as elephants do today. In the seas, life was just as dramatic. The oceans of the Permian were filled with ammonoids, spiraled relatives of squids and octopuses, alongside brachiopods and corals. Large predatory fish, including early sharks, prowled the waters. A hidden gem of the Permian seas was the rise of the first reef systems built by sponges and algae after earlier collapses. According to studies in Paleoworld, these reefs reached impressive sizes and supported diverse marine communities. Many of the animals that lived in the Permian showed traits that pointed to the future, which is what makes them captivating. In contrast to most snakes, synapsids had separate incisors, canines, and cheek teeth. Mammals are unique in that they can specialize in how they eat. Some synapsids even have sense structures that look like whiskers, which suggests they had warm-blooded metabolisms. To put it another way, even though they looked strange, they were actually carrying out tests on evolution that would eventually lead to mammals. Meanwhile, reptiles in the Permian were beginning their own diversification. The earliest ancestors of turtles, lizards, and crocodiles appeared during this time, quietly laying the foundations for future lineages. But during the Permian itself, they lived in the shadow of the synapsid titans. Life on Pangaea during this time was not easy. Harsh climates, vast deserts, and seasonal extremes forced animals to adapt. Some evolved burrowing habits, retreating underground to escape heat or drought. Others developed thick skins or efficient lungs to conserve water. These adaptations show how creatures were already mastering survival in the extreme environments created by the supercontinent. The Great Dying Earth's worst mass extinction. Life on Earth was at its worst about 252 million years ago. This disaster, called the Permian-Triassic extinction or the Great Dying, is still the worst mass extinction that Earth has ever seen. About 90% of sea species and 70% of land animals have gone extinct. Whole ecosystems broke down, leaving the Earth quiet and broken. There were no dinosaurs yet because life had to rebuild itself over millions of years before it could rise again. We need to look at both the reasons and effects of this extinction to fully grasp how it changed the Earth. The main suspect behind the Great Dying is the Siberian Traps, a region of massive volcanic eruptions in what is now Russia. These eruptions lasted for hundreds of thousands of years and released unimaginable amounts of lava, covering an area the size of modern-day Europe. More importantly, they pumped huge quantities of carbon dioxide, methane, and sulfur gases into the atmosphere. A study in Science describes the Siberian Traps as a planetary-scale disaster, altering climate, oceans, and air chemistry simultaneously. The gases triggered a chain reaction of environmental collapse. Carbon dioxide causes intense global warming. Sulfur aerosols produced acid rain that poisoned soils and fresh water. Methane released from melting permafrost and seafloor deposits added to the greenhouse effect, pushing temperatures even higher. Estimates suggest that equatorial regions may have reached lethal heat levels, where animals could not survive outdoors. Oceans were hit hardest. Rising carbon dioxide acidified seawater, making it difficult for corals, shellfish, and other organisms to build calcium carbonate skeletons. At the same time, warming reduced oxygen levels in the oceans, creating vast, dead zones. Evidence from black shale deposits shows that much of the seafloor became anoxic, or oxygen-free. According to research in Earth and Planetary Science letters, microbes in these oxygen-poor waters released toxic hydrogen sulfide gas, which may have escaped into the atmosphere and killed both marine and terrestrial life. On land, ecosystems crumbled. Forests died back as acid rain and climate stress destroyed plants. Herbivores lost their food sources, and predators soon followed. Synapsids, which had been dominant, were decimated. Groups like gorgonopsids disappeared completely. Only smaller, more adaptable lineages, such as the dicynodont Lystrosaurus, survived in significant numbers. Fossil records show that after the extinction, Lystrosaurus became one of the most common animals on Earth, a reminder of how survival often favors resilience over strength. The idea of fungal spikes. Scientists find a lot of fungal spores in rocks right after the last mass extinction. For this reason, it seems that as environments and woods died, fungi took over as the main organisms that broke down dead plants and animals. Earth may have been covered in fungal growth for a while, a sad sign of how much the world had changed. The Great Dying did not happen overnight. Evidence suggests it unfolded in pulses over tens of thousands of years, with intervals of partial recovery followed by renewed crises. This drawn-out collapse made it harder for ecosystems to adapt. The cumulative stress overwhelmed even species that had survived earlier mass extinctions. In the end, the Permian biosphere was almost entirely wiped out. Recovery was painfully slow. It took nearly 10 million years for ecosystems to regain complexity. During the early Triassic, life was dominated by disaster faunas, small, hardy species that could survive in harsh conditions. Coral reefs disappeared for millions of years, replaced by microbial mats. Forests were sparse, and deserts spread widely across Pangaea. Only gradually did reptiles, amphibians, and plants diversify again. Studies in nature geoscience emphasize that this extinction fundamentally reset the evolutionary stage, creating the conditions for new lineages, including the first true dinosaurs, to eventually thrive. The Triassic recovery, life's comeback. Earth was scarred and quiet after the Great Dying, which happened 252 million years ago and killed almost all living things. There were no more people living, the oceans were empty, and the woods were gone. Still, the Triassic period began, and it lasted from about 252 million years ago to 201 million years ago. As the world got better and stronger, small, tough creatures slowly evolved into the ancestors of new kingdoms. The return was not quick or easy. Life had to claw its way back one step at a time, but by the end of the Triassic, the dinosaurs were ready to come. At first, the world was bleak. Fossil records from the early Triassic show ecosystems dominated by only a handful of species. One of the most common was Lystrosaurus, a squat, tusked herbivore belonging to the dicynodonts. In some regions, up to 90% of fossil remains belonged to this single animal. Its success came from resilience. It could burrow to escape harsh climates, eat a wide range of plants, and survive in oxygen-poor environments. While other Permian giants vanished, Lystrosaurus endured and spread across much of Pangaea. The oceans were equally barren. Coral reefs had collapsed, replaced by microbial mats. Simple communities of bacteria that took over while complex organisms were absent. Ammonoids, relatives of squids with coiled shells, were among the few groups to rebound quickly. Their ability to reproduce rapidly helped them survive the extinction and diversify again. Fish and sharks persisted, but remained limited in diversity until later in the Triassic. Climate played a major role in shaping recovery. The early Triassic was marked by extreme heat, with equatorial regions reaching temperatures too high for many animals. Deserts expanded across central Pangaea, and seasonal monsoons drenched the coasts. Oxygen levels were lower than today, adding to the stress. According to research in nature geoscience, these harsh conditions may explain why recovery took millions of years. Life was constantly battling against an unforgiving environment. Yet, slowly, diversity returned. By the Middle Triassic, new groups of reptiles began to flourish. Archosaurs, a lineage that included crocodiles and dinosaurs, appeared and started experimenting with different body plans. Some evolved into sleek, long-legged hunters like Euparkeria. Others became armored plant-eaters or semi-aquatic crocodile-like forms. These archosaurs would eventually dominate, but in the Triassic, they were still sharing space with surviving synapsids and amphibians. Some of the Triassic's less well-known achievements was the return of trees. Seed ferns and conifers spread across the continents, making the soils more stable and increasing the amount of oxygen in the air. When plants came along, they brought bugs, which changed again. In these woods, dragonflies, bugs, and other well-known groups made their homes. When plants came back to bare lands, they created healthy environments that gave animals new food sources and places to stay while they recovered. While the land was still recovering, the seas became laboratories of innovation. Ichthyosaurs, shaped like dolphins but descended from reptiles, appeared in the early Triassic and quickly became dominant predators. Nothosaurs, long-necked swimmers, hunted fish along shallow coasts. These marine reptiles highlight how quickly some groups adapted to fill vacant niches after the extinction. The Triassic also gave birth to the first true turtles. Fossils like Odontocaelis show transitional features, including partial shells and teeth. This marks one of the earliest examples of modern-style reptiles emerging during recovery. Meanwhile, synapsids that survived the Great Dying evolved into cynodonts, small, fur-covered animals with differentiated teeth and advanced jaws. These cynodonts are considered close relatives of mammals, showing that the roots of our own lineage stretch back to this age of recovery. By the late Triassic, ecosystems were stabilizing. Large amphibians patrolled rivers, archosaurs filled roles as predators and herbivores, and marine reptiles ruled the seas. Even the first true dinosaurs appeared, small, agile creatures like Eoraptor and Herrerasaurus. They were not yet dominant, but were testing the evolutionary waters. A study in the Journal of Vertebrate Paleontology notes that these early dinosaurs were opportunists, thriving in ecosystems still open from the extinction. The first dinosaurs, humble beginnings. Most people think of huge dinosaurs like the Brachiosaurus, or scary killers like the Tyrannosaurus rex when they think of dinosaurs, but that wasn't at all how the first dinosaurs looked. They were small, fast, and lived in the shadows of bigger enemies, so no one noticed them very often. They rose to power in the late Triassic, about 230 million years ago. It started out slowly, but they soon took over. The earliest known dinosaurs appeared in what is now South America. Fossils from Argentina, Brazil, and surrounding regions tell us that these pioneers were slender, lightly built reptiles. One of the oldest is Eoraptor, a small carnivore about the size of a dog. With sharp teeth and grasping hands, it likely hunted insects, lizards, and small vertebrates. Another early dinosaur, Herrerasaurus, was larger, about 3 to 4 meters long, and shows some of the features that would define later theropods, including sharp claws and a flexible jaw. A study in Science notes that these animals lived alongside other archosaurs, not yet dominating but competing for survival in a crowded world. The environment they lived in was challenging. Pangaea was still intact, creating vast deserts across its interior. Seasonal monsoons drenched certain regions, while others remained arid. Fossil evidence from South America shows river valleys bordered by forests of conifers, ferns, and cycads. In these ecosystems, dinosaurs were just one group among many. Large amphibians, early crocodile-like reptiles, and synapsid holdovers still shared the land. In fact, for millions of years, dinosaurs were minor players compared to the more successful pseudosuchians, the crocodile-line archosaurs that included massive predators like Postosuchus. What set dinosaurs apart was not size at first, but anatomy. They had upright postures, with legs positioned directly under their bodies. This gave them more efficient movement compared to the sprawling gaits of other reptiles. It meant they could run faster, travel farther, and conserve energy. Paleontologists writing in the Journal of Vertebrate Paleontology argue that this posture was a critical innovation, allowing dinosaurs to survive in harsh Triassic environments where mobility was key. Their breathing system was another unexposed feature. Bone structures show that early dinosaurs may have had air sacs linked to their lungs, like birds do today. This method makes it possible for oxygen to flow continuously, which supports higher amounts of activity. They might have been able to handle situations that made other groups weaker, like changing oxygen levels and uncertain climates, because they were so efficient. The diversity of early dinosaurs was modest, but significant. They split into 3 main lineages that would define their future. Theropods, meat-eaters like Herrerasaurus; sauropodomorphs, long-necked plant-eaters like Plateosaurus; and ornithischians, plant-eaters that would later include stegosaurs and ceratopsians. In the Triassic, these groups were still small and experimental, but the blueprint for later giants was already in place. Plateosaurus, for example, reached lengths of up to 10 meters, showing that some dinosaurs were already testing large body sizes before they became famous for gigantism in the Jurassic. Fossils in Argentina and Brazil suggest they evolved in South America but quickly migrated across Pangaea. Their lightweight bodies and efficient locomotion may have helped them expand into new habitats. Within a few million years, dinosaurs appeared in Africa, Europe, and North America. This early expansion meant they were ready to seize opportunities when their competitors faltered. At the end of the Triassic, about 201 million years ago, massive volcanic eruptions linked to the breakup of Pangaea devastated ecosystems. Many dominant groups, including the crocodile-like pseudosuchians, were wiped out. Dinosaurs, small and adaptable, survived and rapidly diversified in the vacant niches. Research in Nature Geoscience suggests that their ability to tolerate extreme climates and possibly rapid growth rates helped them weather this crisis. Lessons from the pre-dinosaur Earth. Earth had been through billions of years of change before dinosaurs ever came to live here. Life had been through a lot, from fiery starts to frozen snowball Earths, from the first microbes to the first woods. This world before dinosaurs is more than just a list of strange animals and harsh weather. It's also a story about how to survive, adapt, and bounce back from setbacks. When we study these lost worlds, we learn not only about Earth's past, but also about its present and future. The first great leap was photosynthesis, when cyanobacteria began releasing oxygen. That waste product became the foundation of complex life. Later, the Cambrian explosion showed how competition and new traits, like eyes and hard shells, could spark rapid diversification. Each leap forward came from small, almost accidental changes that altered the course of evolution. A study in philosophical transactions of the Royal Society B highlights how these innovations created new possibilities, showing that progress is often the product of adaptation to challenge. The Devonian forests, with their towering trees, transformed the atmosphere and built rich ecosystems. But they also triggered climate instability, leading to mass extinction. Similarly, the dominance of trilobites and reef builders in the Ordovician made oceans diverse but fragile, collapsing when ice ages struck. These examples remind us that ecological prosperity is never permanent. Stability can hide hidden weaknesses. Extinctions themselves provide perhaps the clearest lesson. The Ordovician, Silurian, Devonian, and especially the Permian events all reshaped life. Each time, survivors were not necessarily the biggest or strongest, but the most adaptable. Lystrosaurus, small and unremarkable, became a global survivor after the Great Dying, while mighty predators perished. This pattern shows that endurance in harsh conditions often matters more than dominance in stable ones. According to research in Nature Geoscience, adaptability is the thread connecting all major recoveries. Climate, too, has always been a powerful teacher. Snowball Earth episodes revealed how quickly the planet could swing from warmth to ice. The Carboniferous rainforests showed how oxygen levels could reshape animal size and behavior. The Permian deserts taught species to endure extremes of heat and drought. These ancient climates echo in our own time, where rising greenhouse gases and shifting weather patterns remind us of the same fragility. Hidden within this history is also the lesson of interconnectedness. Plants did not evolve in isolation. They changed rivers, soils, and even oceans. The spread of roots altered erosion. The burial of carbon cooled the climate. Similarly, the rise of predators in the Cambrian forced prey to innovate, driving the evolution of armor, speed, and burrowing. Every shift in one part of the biosphere rippled outward. A paper in geology stresses that Earth's history is a record of linked systems: atmosphere, oceans, continents, and life, each shaping the other. Time itself is another lesson that is often missed. The world before dinosaurs was around for a very long time. The dinosaurs lived for about 165 million years, which is a long time, but not as long as germs or stromatolites. People, on the other hand, have been around for much less than 500,000 years. This view makes us more humble. Even though we think of dinosaurs as very old, they were actually quite new compared to the very long past that came before them. We are the newbies on Earth's big-time scale. If you could stand on Earth through these ages, you would see a planet of reinvention, Lava worlds turning into oceans, frozen spheres thawing into green landscapes, seas filling with trilobites, forests rising, deserts spreading, and creatures constantly adapting to new conditions. Each world vanished, yet each one left behind the clues that shaped the next. Fossils, isotopes, and rocks are not just relics. They are lessons written in stone. Resilience is the most important lesson. Life always came back, even after 5 great extinctions before the dinosaur age. Nothing about it ever came back the same. It changed into something else. People who lived rebuilt ecosystems and tried out new body types and habits until the Earth was once again living. Resilience says that once life is formed, it is extremely difficult to erase. Even when disasters seem to be over, it changes, adapts, and stays the same. We've traveled through fiery beginnings, frozen oceans, endless swamps, and the strange empires that ruled long before dinosaurs ever appeared. Each forgotten world taught us lessons about survival, adaptation, and the fragile balance of life. And yet, these stories aren't just history. They're reminders of how extraordinary our planet truly is. If you enjoyed this journey into Earth's hidden past, make sure to hit that like button. Subscribe for more deep dives into the wonders of science and history, and drop a comment below about which pre-dinosaur world fascinated you the most. And don't forget to watch our next video, where we'll uncover more secrets that textbooks rarely tell.